I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's we're at opposite ends of the day, I think. It's nighttime for you, yeah?
And it's a day earlier than you too, which is crazy.
So I'm a little ahead. Oh, I'm rarely ahead in anything in life, so I'll take that.
I can relate.
Oh my goodness. Shall we start? Do we want to start talking about you professionally or a bit more you personally? Where do you want to go with this? Because we've got so much potentially good gutsy stuff to get into today.
Right.
Do we want to tell people a bit about what do you do? What do you do?
Sure. I can totally do that. Well, I am a mental health therapist in the Seattle area in Washington.
Oh,
Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
no.
Sorry. And I have been doing that for about 10 years, off and on, kind of stopped when I became a mom and took a long break. And just in the last about 2 years, I've begun to specialize more in perinatal work and also birth trauma. And then I volunteer with, do you know Perinatals Postpartum Support International? Are you familiar with that organization? So I volunteer with the local chapter in Washington here, and I am doing the Warm Line, which you might be familiar with, which is just moms have a number that they can call in that are local, and they can get additional support and help or good referrals, resources, talk to someone who's been through what they've been through. And so I do that 1 week a month as well. Yeah. That's kind of an overview of what I do. And I work part-time because I also have 2 little kids at home. So that's my other job.
It is a juggle, isn't it? Like
it is. It's constant juggling.
it's juggling like it's not even plates. I think it's just like machetes that are on fire and greased up. And I don't believe in this whole like balance. I think for these years, however long it lasts, there is no balance. It's just chaos.
Right.
Pockets of like, oh, that part was okay, or I was on time for that bit. Like, it's a constant state of half-assing everything.
Basically, nothing's like 100% great. Everything's halfway done.
So I guess if we think about, I know you wanted to talk about at least one of your births. Just one of your births, I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, one of my births that's applies to the birth trauma. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to let us in?
Sure. So it's almost 6. My son is almost 6 now. And so almost 6 years ago, I had him, and my birth, it was generally like a typical, I guess you would say. I had midwives, and I went into labor at like 40 weeks, and it was kind of slow going, and they sent me home, and then my water broke at home, and still when I got there, it was like slow going. So I ended up kind of being a very, I guess what you would say, your textbook hospital birth, where you get the whole Pitocin, and then you get the epidural, just kind of all the things that maybe we would like to avoid. And that can kind of, obviously muddy the waters with other, with the birth process. But I was naive.
First birth, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, we just don't, it's our first birth. You just don't know. You don't know until you know.
Don't know anything. Oh, yeah.
You do your best, right? You read, you class, you do whatever, but you just really don't know. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say the whole from start to finish was insanely long. It was like a little over 24 hours, I think. But towards the end, I was getting pretty tired. I was pushing for quite a long time. And my son's heart rate, I've since got my birth records, which I just encourage everyone to do later when they're ready to look at their records, because it could just be helpful in processing, because, you just are so tired and you just don't really understand always what's going on. And I actually recently got them not too long ago, and they had kept saying to me during the birth that his heart rate was just a little iffy. I don't remember all the terms they used. And so they were just kind of trying to keep an eye on that. And it just seemed, and I also had gotten a fever, which can
Mm.
happen if you get an epidural, but it can also happen if your water's broke for too
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
And they don't know which comes first. So then they're monitoring the baby and thinking, well, what if they have a fever? And everything, it's just like everything becomes
Mm.
suddenly kind of more complicated.
Yeah.
And I was just really, really getting encouraged that we needed to have an intervention of some kind. And so they brought in an OB, a male OB who I'd never met.
Of course.
And of course, right? And he was, perfectly nice. And he said to me, I think this is kind of where things can start to feel difficult for women as they look back, or maybe even in the moment too, although I didn't think of it in the moment, that he was like, if you don't get this baby out, you're going to have a C-section.
Mm.
And so, right, like I think a lot of women hear this kind of threat, right? And so he was like, I'm going to use the vacuum and I'm going to do it 3 times. And if it pops off, then you have to have a C-section. So of course, in my mind, I'm like, well, that's the worst thing ever. Like, I don't want a C-section because, that's what we kind of are trained to think like, oh, they're the worst thing ever to have a C-section. And so I pushed with all my might. And the second time my son came out and he was very big, which nobody had anticipated. He was 9'11", so he's almost 10 pounds, and he had a pretty large head. And, he was rushed up to the NICU actually about 5 seconds after I got to meet him because they just wanted to check on everything. And I was just out of it. And, you're just out of it and you're exhausted. I didn't know kind of how I felt or what was really going on. And I remember I sent like everybody upstairs with the baby, just thinking like, oh, just go be with the baby. And I just remember I was laying alone in the hospital bed while I was getting stitched up. And the OB said to me at the time that he was like, oh, you only had a 2nd-degree tear. Like he was so proud that it was like
a fish or something.
Yeah. And I just started thinking, okay, like I guess that's good. And and then after that my son ended up being fine. Like he had to have some meds for it to stave off any infection or whatever, but everything was fine. So basically after that, seemingly fine, after the first week and a half of being at home, things seemed fine. And then I started realizing that something wasn't right. I started noticing that I had, to get kind of graphic, like a discharge that I wasn't familiar with. That wasn't just blood. And so I kind of just called my midwives and told them about it. And then I started looking online and Googling, which can be scary. And I started really believing that I had an obstetric fistula.
Yeah. Okay.
And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's when basically a hole is created either within the like rectal mucosa or the kind of, I don't know, it's like the small, I don't even know all the terminology for it, but
hole
sort
where
of
a hole shouldn't be, really, isn't it?
What's that?
It's a hole where a hole shouldn't be.
Exactly. You either get a hole between your rectum and your vagina, or you get a hole like somewhere between like where your urethra, like where you pee.
Yeah.
So it's women either get one or the other. And mine unfortunately happened to be between my rectum and my vagina. And I'd never heard of any of this happening in my whole life. I'd never heard of a fistula. And of course, now I think we all know it's a third world country thing, mostly when you read about it. But it does happen here, apparently. I can speak to that. But I was, go ahead.
Really, Kristin, I think it is. Because I think, like some of us are old enough, I suppose, to remember that episode with Catherine Hamlin and Oprah. And like, oh, that's interesting. But that's a thing that happens over there to other people who aren't us.
Right.
It's an us them thing that happens, which then when it does happen makes it even more like, oh my God, like what?
Right. Like, what's wrong with me? Why did that happen to me if it happens to so few people, It's a bizarre thing. And I think this happens to a lot of women when something happens in birth that you don't expect. or you don't know about, because you just feel shocked, because we just don't talk about a lot of the sort of injuries that can happen in birth in general, even like 4th-degree tears, there's not a lot of conversation about what that really means when it happens to you. And so I was just like blindsided and kind of in shock. And, my midwives were completely also in shock and really didn't know what to do with me other than to send me to the OB who had delivered my son. And when I went to see him, he, again, your doctor is thinking about any kind of responsibility on them and how much they can push that off of themselves. And he basically told me it was probably my fault. That's something I had done when I was home.
Oh, wow.
And
how would that, like, how would you just go on about your day, give yourself a fistula, I wonder?
Right. He had mentioned pressure from going to the bathroom when I was home. But he was very sure to distance himself from any sort of mistake on his part. Even in the notes that I read recently, he was very clear, like, my work looked good and clean and as if it was healing,
That's really interesting language you've just used there too, like good and clean versus like dirty and shameful and all the stuff that goes with having an injury, a birth injury.
Right. Yeah. So I was very traumatized because obviously having a hole in that area of your body is not pleasant. And it was a little bit smaller than the size of a quarter. So it wasn't exactly that small.
That's quite the visual.
Yeah. And the thing about it is then you have to wait for your body to heal from birth before you can get a repair. And so for 4 months, I was adjusting to being a new mom and also dealing with this bodily trauma where, I just liken it to just like having a constant trigger that you carry in your body every day, all day, where, you've had this traumatic event happen, the discovery of something, and then you're just living in hypervigilant world constantly. Like, when's the next, like, when am I going to have to go to the bathroom? Like, what's that going to be like? Where am I going to be at? Just constant hypervigilance, constant thinking about how I could have prevented it, because the blame was put on me. And so I took that in as like, I should have done something different. And kind of replaying, it's part of PTSD, right? We replay the event over and over. And so I was just in a really heightened state of anxiety for about 4 months. And I didn't, even as a therapist, it never occurred to me, oh, you might have PTSD, or, you might have any kind of like postpartum anything. Like, it just never, because, when we're in it, you're just in it. You're not aware, really.
You don't know where your nose is half the days. Like, when you've got a baby, that real, I think even if you don't have any kind of diagnosable or otherwise something to label you with, that period is just so fraught with like checking and worrying and being startled, and like just so many things go into that experience anyway, that you then add on top of, I'm just like, shell shocked from my birth and don't even really have time to sit down and like process it, let alone anything else, because you're just trying to figure out like, where did you put your car keys, and there's somebody who needs me 24.
Right. Yes, it's so much just becoming a new mother, let alone adding any of that, like body trauma that you have. And it's just, I think what when I look back, I think about none of my providers, it was just like no one was there to help guide me. Like, emotionally, this is going to be really difficult, and you might need some extra support, which when I look back, I'm like, that's crazy that no one said to me, wow, you had like something happen to you that is really emotionally difficult, and let's get you connected with someone who works with that, which is again why I do that work now, because it's crazy to me that no one thought to do that. But 4 months postpartum, I had my first surgery. and surgeries in that part of the body and that sort of tissue are very tricky, and they're not always known to work 100%. So sort of the shorter version of the story is it didn't fully heal. It healed 90%. And then which is great because it was like a size of a pinpoint versus, almost a quarter. But once you had that trauma, any feeling, any sensation, you're still living with, because it's still there, even though maybe I wasn't experiencing symptoms near as much. I was still living in that space in my head.
Of course. I imagine like just the terror of like even just being able to leave the house, like planning, where's the toilet going to be? Am I going to be okay? Should I laugh? Should I cough? Like, any of that.
Yeah. It's just it was a constant worry that just sat in the back of my head. And I am thankful. I have a very supportive family, husband, friends. And I did sort of try to get out and be not just like sink into a hole, which I understand a lot of women do, and I totally get that. And I think that helped me from sinking, deep in. But I didn't end up getting any sort of like therapy or any help until about a year out. And I honestly don't remember how. I think I was on my own. I realized, oh, hey, maybe I need to talk to someone. And I found a therapist who specialized in perinatal health and maternal health, and started working with her to kind of help me live with what I still had, and just kind of figure out how to live with everything. And
which is just like, it's criminal really that we put so much pressure, onus on like people who've just given birth to figure out what it is that they need, go find it, ask for it, be in a position again, like thinking like, well, you've got a baby, you've got to leave the house. Like it's such in some ways when I talk to students and registrars that I work with, like even in Australia, like the joke so much of, when therapists are sort of like smacked over the hand, so to speak, because their clients don't turn up and they're late. And it's just this massive joke to me of like, yeah, they have babies. They don't sleep. Like to think, is it even safe for you to get in your car and drive to an appointment today? Like who's going to help you with the pram? It's like just all the different factors that go into, like, I think sometimes people forget how much effort it really is for someone to get to an appointment.
It is.
If they even just got through the door and went, oh my God, I'm here, and that's all they can manage. Like, hooray, you did it. Like, it's
so much effort for them to just call, to make the appointment.
Yeah.
And I've learned from working on the worm line that if them just calling you one time, if you don't call them back or immediately, or if they don't get, like, maybe the first person they're referred to is full, they're not going to keep fighting many times.
No way. Even, like I think about myself with my first baby and breastfeeding issues and whatever else, and someone saying to me, oh, I want you to go and see this GP who specializes in breastfeeding. Oh, but it's Christmas. It'll be a 6-week wait. No.
Yeah.
Forget about it. Forget about it.
Yeah. It's too overwhelming. And it doesn't. It's the system. I mean, clearly you guys are experiencing it as well in Australia. Like, it's just completely broken, and there hasn't been enough education with our OBs, specifically, I think, around how to support women who have had birth, that was traumatic, or who are, experiencing a PMAT, like a mood disorder from birth. There's just a gap. I'm noticing it. I mean, you see it too. I'm sure I see it all the time. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with anyone. And I think that was very much the case for me, and my midwives even didn't, they didn't know what to do with me. And especially the OB, wanted to distance himself, I think. So, it's hard to have to be your own advocate when you're in it.
I know, so.
Yeah, it's just unfair for any woman to have to do that. So, I I'm just trying to think. I ended up kind of planning after a lot of different doctor's visits, appointments, you know, after a second surgery that failed, to try to have another baby before we do a final surgery.
Yeah.
And so I lived with the 90% healed fistula for a total time of um, 4 years, 4.5 years. Yeah, 4 years. And then I had a second baby, which actually I ended up opting to have a C-section
Yeah.
to reduce any trauma. And I think that's another
thing as
thing.
well. It's worth mentioning, like, as you
Yeah.
say, C-sections are not evil. Like,
No.
because we have them, and in some cases they really help mentally, physically,
Yes.
everything.
Yes, and I think that's a good point, you know, to say that, yes, we want birth that's, you know, not intervened with all these different things in the hospital, because they do create other problems. But then on the other side of it, if you do have a severe tear, I mean, I've read a lot of stories that are horrifying about women who've had 4th-degree tears who then were still encouraged to have vaginal births, and you know, and then their, you know, that muscle, their rectal muscle is like completely done for, and they have, you know, no ability, they have incontinence. And if someone would have just said, have a C-section, you know, and so I'm thankful that, you know, I kind of learned that, okay, I have to be my own advocate. I had a really great therapist who had a relationship with the hospital that I switched over to and knew kind of all the providers. And she helped me have a team of people who, like, I had, you know, I had a surgeon who was going to, you know, potentially be at my birth if needed, you know, if I went into labor and had to have a vaginal birth last minute or something, but someone who was going to be there. And then my OB was incredible and extremely supportive. We made sure that any staff person or nurse that was working with me before and after knew my story, so that I didn't have to repeat anything prior to it, or, you know, kind of that there was just this sensitivity of like this needing to kind of be a good experience. And so my birth via C-section was amazing. And my healing was actually great and fine, and not there, I had no issues. And so I look at the C-section as like being a really healing experience for me. And I worry, I think, sometimes about the push of like natural home births, which I think are also great. And obviously we know statistically I think they are overall better for the health of mothers, but there are also these other, you know, aspects of women needing to prevent their body from further, you know, injury.
It's about choice, and about, if we believe that statement that, you know, it is definitely so much more than a healthy baby.
Yes.
Not just shooting for a healthy baby, then we need to consider all the other factors.
Yeah.
And choice is a huge
choice. Yeah, choice. And, you know, I even think about the choice to, you know, when you're in the moment giving birth and someone's like, you know, I got to use this, you know, a vacuum or a forceps versus a C-section. There's not even any conversation about risk to you and your body. It's kind of all about the baby at that point. And it's like, wait, let me know. I don't know what I would have done if I, you know, been given. No, I don't think anyone would have said you might have a fistula from this, but like, you know, I could have had a much worse tear. And no one talked to me about that when I was making that decision. And so there just needs to be much more information given. Obviously, we know more information given to women when they're having to make a choice that involves them thinking about their body and what it's going to do to them. As much as our baby, who we want to be healthy and obviously not hurt in birth. Yeah.
But I think, and I will always say, and I think I'll say until the day I'm like not even able to utter words anymore, like it's not like the top thing to shoot for. Like, that's the baseline. Like, baseline is the healthy baby. Like, that's the floor. Like, let's not sort of just aim for like, oh, the minimum.
Exactly.
There's so much more that we can be not just like asking for, but demanding and saying, you know, if you think back to, particularly in a situation where you've got like an OB, it's like, I think we forget sometimes, like, well, you're employing these people. They work for you. Like,
exactly.
they're thinking about it in terms of like, you wanted to get really like, yep, there's this, I suppose, theme of OBs getting really worried, malpractice suits, how are things going to be? It's like, well, actually, you're like working for me and you didn't like perform your duties as I like asked them to be performed. Instead of putting all the onus on the like, yeah, of course. It's just the lack of course. Oh, right, well, it's something that you did at home. You gave yourself a fistula because
right.
whatever the end of that sentence would be, but
right.
So much backtracking, and that we've gotten ourselves into a state where there's just so much fear, I think, in the birth.
Yes.
And a huge part of that is coming from people who are birthing, who don't have the knowledge that they need to have, but it's also coming from staff who are so, like, you can't do your best work if you're operating from fear.
Right.
Thinking like, instead of the joy and the love and all the compassion of like, oh, I better not get sued. How much fun is that going to work every day thinking, oh, better not get sued?
Right.
You can't keep going with that.
No. I mean, that's clearly what's wrong with all of our systems, right? Is the fear and the control of the hospital, you know, all of that goes into the politics of all of that, I think, is a huge reason why we have such issues to begin with.
Do you remember, was there a day or a time that things shifted for you through this process and you thought, I'm actually starting to feel more empowered? I'm actually starting to feel like me, the person, and not me, the patient, me, the mum, me, the whatever.
Right. That's a good question. I can't think of a maybe specific time other than I think I think after the first surgery, after those first 4 months, when I had 90% of it healed, even though I was living with a lot of anxiety, I remember for a good amount of time feeling like more myself again, because I was, my body was generally back to its original state, so to speak, whatever that is anymore after you have a baby.
It doesn't exist, but I know
it really doesn't. It's it was my new normal, I guess. But I don't think I felt fully physically released until that final surgery when my second son was 6 months old, honestly. I remember walking out of the 6-week post-op checkup, getting the like 100% it's healed kind of, and just walking out with tears, you know, running down my face. My husband was waiting for me and my kids, and just feeling free. Honestly, I just felt suddenly free. And that doesn't mean that I still actually don't sort of live with stuff still. And in fact, I just started seeing an EMDR therapist, because I do have some just residual things, I think, from living like for such a long time in that sort of a hypervigilant state. But it took that final surgery, I think, to really help me feel free, physically from, I just really felt like my body and my mind were like in bondage, and that I just got hijacked completely, from just sort of like who I was, honestly.
And I think a lot of people who have a traumatic birth in any way, shape or form, whether, you know, doesn't, like, it's in the eye of the beholder, doesn't matter what someone thinks is traumatic, but yeah, sense of being hijacked is a good way to describe it, because sometimes it is, like, it's people coming into your space and saying, no, this is the way it's going to be now, and you're vulnerable and that's not the time to be making decisions. And I think, you know, like, a huge part of what we don't prepare people for is that it's not so much part of it is they're having the information, but it's realizing that when you are vulnerable and you're birthing, that's not the time to sort of be going, do I want to do this? Is that the decision I want to make? Because you're just not able to. I mean, you are, but you're not fully, you don't want to be in that part of your brain, like in full decision-making mode.
Right.
And when someone says, oh, if you don't do X, Y is going to happen, and Y is always like dead baby.
Yeah.
It's never like well, there's a 3% chance of this happening versus there's a 70% chance of this happening. Let's weigh up the risks. What do you want to do?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. That's that threatening language that is traumatic for so many women. The threatening, if you don't do this, then this. That's why I'm so thankful that we have doulas. Right. And sort of we need those advocates right with us, kind of helping sort of guide us when things feel unclear and I didn't have a doula. I was like, oh, that's just for like granola, like hippie people, you know.
I just was in that camp too for my first birth. Okay.
Exactly. A lot of us are. And now, of course, if you read the research, you know, it's not, you know, they reduce trauma. So, you know, just having more advocates, you know, on the ground for women who are in the birthing moments, right?
Yeah.
And nurses who can be advocates and push up against the powers, you know, that are in the hospital.
The dynamic is so different. I think this is it. Like, I think we're not in a position where people are going to stop giving birth in hospital and we'll all go back to having birth at home. I pretty much think that's not going to happen. If it does, it's not going to happen in our lifetime, I don't think.
Right.
So if we know that people are going to continue having births in hospital, then we have to acknowledge that while you're in their space, it is their space. As much as we try and do childbirth education that prepares people to say, no, you employ them, you take it over. It's a total imbalance of power.
Right.
Total imbalance of power. So I think for people sometimes who are in that, when I talk to people outside of birth workers who are like, like you don't sort of get it. It's like you and maybe your partner, and then you're outnumbered. And so whatever they say goes. Whereas if you've got that extra person in your corner to go, excuse me.
Yes.
Don't be talking to her like that. Do we really need to do that? And who aren't in that full primal, like waiting for your like brand new baby to be born so you just agree to anything. It makes a difference. Oh my goodness, it makes such a difference.
Yeah, it would make such a difference. I wish I had one of those people.
And even I think just having people who have the understanding that what they say to you in that space is sometimes even more powerful than what they do.
Yes, that is 100% true. I think more training around the phrases that are used and the way that things are communicated in those moments is key to helping women feel like they have a choice and helping women feel supported instead of, you know, the threatening. And I don't know if doctors always realize that they seem that way. You know, I honestly don't know. I would love to talk with more OBs, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, but here it's really difficult to connect with OBs and just have conversations like this, unless maybe you're like friends with them. They don't come to a lot of the trainings that I've been to for, you know, for mood disorders and for birth trauma. And so I don't really know where they're getting that additional input, or if they are. But they need to be hearing from women who have experienced these things. They need to be hearing real stories. And I actually got a chance to go speak with a group of midwives in training and share my story. And I felt like they actually all were so sweet, and they all sent me these cards afterwards. And they were like, this is going to stick with me because it's like a story that I can hold on to, you know. And it's like, we respond to stories. That's why you're doing this podcast, right? Like, we respond to stories. They stick with us. And, you know, so how can we just use people's stories to change the system, you know? That seems to be, I don't know, that feels the best way.
Yeah, and I think it's through the stories as well that it's the connecting of the things. And I think so much as we know, what happens is people birth their baby, and that's it. You disappear. You never see. You most likely never see some of these people who are in the most like significant, intimate moment of your life again.
Right.
And there's all the different kind of things that go with that. Like we hear the stories of people who sometimes people kind of like, it's not quite the right phrase I like, but I don't kind of know what the better phrase would be, but it's like they almost fall in love with their OB a little bit, particularly with the language around the like, oh, you saved me. Oh, what would have happened if you weren't here? Because like you're not able to kind of do that second level thinking of going, hang on, did you cause this? Like, was that necessary? Without going through and doing all the things. Sometimes people get really lost in the story of, oh my God, my baby nearly died. And if it wasn't for this person here who saved them, because if you go to the other part of the thinking, which is the like, hang on, maybe this was all unnecessary cascading stuff that happens, that's a much, much scarier thought. And so you leave, and unless I suppose you're going back to your hospital for some sort of support that they offer, or you're going back for surgery, or you're going back for a debrief, you never see these people ever again.
Yeah.
And so you don't know, I suppose, as a healthcare professional, the impact that your words, your actions have had on someone.
Yes.
So you just go away and go, oh, well, you know, another shift. Potentially.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's very true. Unless you're making, you know, I think there are times when people make, you know, try to, what's the word, you know, call, potentially have like a case against a doctor or something, you know, there's those moments, right? But even those are really hard to prove and for people to litigate, or, you know, that's probably the only time, you know, maybe something negative that they do might come back to them. And I actually did report, and I think it's good to talk about this too. I did report what happened as potential negligence, because I just felt like I needed to do that. But I do think it's really important for women to understand, if you're going to do that, you're going to be re-traumatized, because you are going to have to repeat your story over and over and over again to strangers on the phone that work for whomever, the hospital, the insurance company. So I don't even know that it's often worth it, unless it's like a, you know, I don't think that mine was. I think I needed to go through the process for myself, and nothing happened because there's no proof. But it's just it's something to think about for women if they think that they want to make a complaint or.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's something I've talked to clients about this a lot, and I've supported clients through it, but I don't think I've talked about it much on the podcast. That's one for a future episode, actually talking about the legal side of things. But yeah, that re-traumatizing process happens, which is why if we think about, I suppose, similar but not so similar, slightly different situation like with sexual assault, why people drop cases and why they move forward, and why it takes years and years and years, because people forget about the first person you told, what was their response, and then sometimes police response. And again, we've got police officers who are beautifully trained and empathic and compassionate, but sometimes we don't. And so the story stops there, because people get asked things like, well, what were you wearing, and how many drinks did you have, and what could you have done to contribute to this? And then it's like, well, bam. You're just re-traumatized all over again. And sometimes in cases where it's, you think, okay, well, at least I'll get some monetary compensation. I always think of, I won't go into too much detail, but there was a client I had once who was sexually assaulted by someone in a lot of power, like a lot of power. And she took him to court. And in the end, after she paid for all her legal fees and everything else to sue this person, she had enough money to buy a washing machine. So she bought a washing machine, even though like this horrific thing had happened to her. And the story should have been, well, he should have gone to jail for X amount of time, and he was in so much power, and how could this happen? And there was all this media stuff. And in the end, yeah, she got some money, but by the time she paid for all the legal stuff and the extra therapy to go through the process of legal proceedings, which go on for years and years and years and years, she bought a washing machine.
Yeah.
Like, right, cool.
Yeah.
Was it worth it? Probably not. Which is not to say that it's not worth it. For some people, it absolutely gives them a sense of power back. But I guess the cost-benefit thing that you have to do.
yeah, I think that's just it's again, it's just like with like just knowing as much as you can know about, okay, if I go into this, what's that going to mean? You know, what's that going to do to me? It's just having people that can help guide you, you know, that have been through it or that are aware, that can help prevent further, you know, further damage, further trauma.
Yeah. But it's, I think, is what you're hinting at is, or at least what I'm trying to hint at very strongly, is you almost need support for that stage as well. So absolutely, if someone's been negligent, you want to sue them, you want to make a complaint, go for it. I would never say to someone, no, there's no point, you can't do that, but you need a next level of support through that process. As I've talked about before, like here, I think it happens in the US, I think it happens everywhere, that sometimes what's called a birth debrief, where you go back to the hospital and debrief, I'm using inverted commas for people who are listening can't see, it's not about that at all. It's like, oh, do you want to make a complaint? And really, like, yeah, it's not even, there's nothing psychological or therapeutic about it. It's a complaint procedure. It's a grievance procedure, but it's there's nothing therapeutic about it.
Wow.
Team of people, and then there's the person who was birthing, and sometimes they don't bring in anyone. They don't bring an advocate, they don't bring in any support, and it's kind of like, well, the records say this, you agreed that this happened and this happened, and it's, yeah, it just gets like, how can we get rid of this person as soon as possible?
Yeah. Wow.
What happens to you?
They do that with every birth in Australia, or is that just for?
No, I think it's just because there's inconsistency in what is a debrief.
I see.
No, like legal or other parameters around this is what we mean by this. It's not always like that. For some people it is. You go back and you talk to your midwife and you go over your notes, and it is really supportive and compassionate. But for some people it's sitting in a room across the table from other people, and it's like, okay, well, it's, you know, that mode of, you're not going to sue us. You're not going to sue us. Our legal representative is here. Do your worst. And you think about, like, yeah, again, people who've just given birth, who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
How easy it is to just be flicked away.
Totally. I do like the idea of, and I don't know how many people do that. I don't hear about this often here in the States, but about going back to your midwife or your OB and talking about the birth afterwards. I never hear about people that do that. And imagine a world where people could do that and feel safe to express, you know, maybe they don't want to go back to them, maybe because they're the perpetrator. But I do think that there are times when maybe it's not even the birth person, but sitting with someone who has the medical knowledge to explain to you, to answer your questions, I think is really, can be very helpful. And I wish that there was more of that. You know, I don't know again what it's like there, but there's 6 weeks postpartum checkup and that's it. You're not seeing anyone before 6 weeks here. And it's pretty quick. It's kind of like, check you, make sure you're good, move on to the next patient. So there's not a lot of time to process anything. And if providers were taking more time to do that, there might be, you know, more healing for people quicker, right? Yeah, there's just so much. I think there's just so much we can do, or so much that can be done to change. That doesn't even have to be huge, you know, policy changes. It's just people to people changes, you know.
Do you think for you, like even being offered after, so you've had the physical injury, which the medical community generally respond to a bit better because they just think trauma means injury. Had you even been offered, oh, okay, there's the option of surgery, there's the option of this, but also, hey, for your just well-being, to talk to someone, would that have been helpful, or do you think you would have, in that space and time, kind of gone, yep, don't know what you're talking about, don't need it?
No, I definitely think I would have done it, just because I you know, I'm a therapist, so I'm very pro therapy. Not that every therapist would have responded that way, but I'm very much pro that and had been to therapy before. So I think I would have been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You know, if someone had helped me do that, I think I totally would have been glad to go.
Because I often wonder, again, I don't know that there's like really clear parameters about when is counselling and support offered and when is it not. Because again, I think it's case by case, hospital by hospital. Everybody's got a slightly different story depending on where they live and where they work and all that kind of thing. So I wonder if that's part of the problem too. So there's no standards really.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like maybe in 6 weeks you go back and you say something to your doctor and they might give you a name and that's it. Versus what if someone says to you when you're leaving the hospital, hey, you just went through, your birth was a little more traumatic or whatever. We'll just send you with some name, just someone even stating or confirming what you're already feeling, affirming that, and not, so you don't walk out being like, was that okay? Was that not? Like someone actually affirming that, yeah, that was rough, I think that would be really affirming for a lot of women. And maybe they wouldn't take it right then, but because, sometimes when we're just out of birth, we're not, we can't even process what happened for a while.
There's a lot of pamphlets, like depending on where you go.
Oh my gosh, so many. Yeah. I mean, I had the perinatal support pamphlet or the one that I now volunteer with. I never saw it. I never looked at it. It wasn't until I think I just spoke with, I think it really is about person to person contact. I think that's what helps. I mean, I just notice that when I talk to women all the time on the warm line, as soon as I just say like, it makes total sense why you're feeling it. As soon as I affirm their experience and yeah, I've been there too. It's like, you can just hear the sort of relief and you can hear the sort of like, wow, someone actually gets me and I'm not crazy. And like, what, my experience is not crazy. It's just contact.
Gosh, it's always such common sense stuff.
Yeah.
I'm always talking to people about, and yet it's the like, okay, so why isn't this happening? Why is it so hard? But I think this is part of it, is that the more people that you talk to, the more conversations you have, the more stories, the more people will kind of go, yep, all right, this is something I can do. And I always say, like, you don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be. You just have to be someone there who cares. You can say, that sucked. Do you want to talk about it? I'm here. Without like falling into all the things that people fall into. And some of that is temperament and personality. And I do think a huge part of it can actually be taught. Like, it's in there. But some people struggle with I wasn't taught how to like do any of this, so I don't know. So they just default to things that sometimes are not helpful, the cliches and the kind of, fobbing things off. And it's like, and I'm sure, again, it's the case of sometimes people go home later or they drive home and they go, oh my God, why did I say that to that woman? That wasn't like the most helpful thing to say. And again, because she doesn't have the time or the energy or the resources to ring her up and go, hang on, I said something to you earlier today. It wasn't what I meant to say.
Right.
It gets left as this, well, probably shouldn't have said that. Don't beat yourself up about it. But then that could impact someone for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
I often think about that too, how we're kind of like so split between like, oh, no, never going to say these people again. What difference it would make if someone said, oh, I didn't mean to say that. That wasn't like, I just didn't know what to say. Okay? I just didn't know what to say because I wasn't trained. These things happen so often. And that there isn't a perfect thing to say. It's not. It's just a communication, as you say, of like, I hear you, I see you.
Yeah.
Compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
Where can people find you, work with you if they want to? If they're going, hang on, I know I'm another person who's not like a 13-year-old girl in Africa.
Yeah.
Not what you want to be the poster girl for, I know.
What's that?
You didn't want to be the poster girl for like fistula happens to people who are not.
I mean, I didn't want to be, but here I am, right? And then, I am happy to talk with anyone, I mean, they can reach me. I'm on Instagram, Kristin Hill. That's just my handle. And email, should I say all that stuff now?
I usually put it in the show notes because I figure people are probably not. I mean, I don't know. I don't listen to podcasts and then like furiously scribble stuff. I just wait underneath. So I don't know. I think it's like maybe one of those old throwbacks to like, no, we've got to say it all now because otherwise you're going to miss it. So I don't know. When you think about it, I never think, I don't know if people need to say all that stuff, but I will definitely put it in.
Okay. I mean, I have a website, but for counseling, but I'm actually kind of transitioning, I think, I'm actually reimagining what my work world is going to look like.
How exciting and terrifying.
It's exciting. Yeah, I'm just not, I want to branch out from sort of traditional one-to-one therapy, but I still want to be in a supportive role. And I really I've done a lot of couples therapy, and I like the idea of working with the couple, either to process a traumatic birth, and doing it in their homes, and also being an advocate and sort of a educator of sorts, for prevention. So I don't really know what that's all going to look like, but I just am excited to keep exploring and trying to figure out specifically what it's going to be. And, that's, if there's anything, no, I didn't want to be the fistula person, but I think, this too, probably, that when you have something traumatic that happens, it connects you with your humanity in such a deep way to suffering, and what that means to really suffer. And I don't think we can really fully live a human life without knowing what it feels like to suffer.
No way. No way.
Right. So I think, as much as it's horrible, I think we all suffer in various ways, right? And so if nothing else, it connected me to that, which I think makes me better at working with people and understanding their suffering. And so I'm thankful for that, that is sort of the outcome, the positive outcome of what I do. So yeah.
And on that, I guess I'm just thinking about you again being the poster girl. Are there any resources, books, articles, anything that you found particularly helpful that made you feel less like an isolated anomaly? Because, as I said, I know people will hear fistula and they'll think Catherine Hamlin, they're going to think Africa, which might not be, I'm always for people finding whatever resources fit for them. Was there anything that made you kind of feel less ostracized, alone?
Yeah, there's a Facebook group for women with fistulas. I'm not on it anymore because after a while it was almost like too much to kind of read everything. But at first it was really helpful to kind of direct me on what kind of doctor, what kind of surgery, all the kind of questions I needed to ask and know. And that was, if you try to go online otherwise and search for articles that relate to not third world countries and sort of this issue, it's very difficult to find.
That's what I was thinking. That was my guess, which is why I asked. I'm thinking, I don't remember even coming across anything, even as I've learned about it and trained in it. It's very much kind of there's obstetric injuries, and then there's the severe stuff, but there's definitely this attitude of that only happens over there, right? Where over there is.
Yeah, it's true. There's just not a lot. I mean, I remember spending many, many late nights trying to find research and articles, and there's very few. And most of them, the research are inconclusive in terms of what's the best approach and, kind of how to, no one's talking about, except for in these Facebook groups, I would say, sort of the residual effects of living with something like that. And I think people with 4th degree tears who experience incontinence can relate also to that feeling of living with this injury in your body where you don't know what's going to happen day to day, and there's shame and there's embarrassment and fear of, will it ever be fixed, and no one's talking about, that's not stuff that you're reading about in an article or people are talking about openly. So I would just encourage anyone who has a 4th degree tear or incontinence or a fistula to search for those private groups, because that's where you're going to find that support in those conversations. And of course, I'm happy to talk with anyone also.
I think that's going to be so helpful because you'd never, no one's ever going to plan for this, but you mark my words, at some stage there's going to be a doula, a midwife, someone who's listening to that going, I remember.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about.
I mean, I hope so. I that's my goal is like, okay, I went through this insane amount of craziness, and I hope that something, which is why I wanted to talk to you, right? Something I say can help someone else. That's all.
Yeah.
Prevent. And I would also like to add that I've learned that a preventative action that could be taken if you give birth to a baby that's large, have an intervention like a vacuum or forceps, maybe have had an epidural or birthing pushing for a super long time where that kind of weakens all that tissue and muscle.
Mm.
Doctors can opt to take you into a surgical room and do a very a detailed inspection of that entire area in like with surgical lighting and everything.
Yeah.
And they potentially could find things that they could miss. I don't know how they repair tears. And I'll show you if that's like already stuff what they do, but in my case they didn't do that. I was just in the delivery room and I just thought, man, if I had known about that, maybe I would have asked that. I don't know. Or maybe someone else could have said, hey, those 3 things happened to her. Big baby, intervention, forceps and epidural, maybe let's take a better look,
Mm.
And I just want people to know that they can ask for that you can ask for your doctor to do that if you have any fear around severe tears.
Yeah, it's an interesting point actually, because you're making me think back to my first birth when I had an internal tear. So I've told the story before, but my little darling pulled out a bit of my vaginal wall, but there was no, at first glance, any indication that anything was wrong. And I remember my OB saying to me the next day, she said, I'm so sorry. It's just a freaky thing that happened and everything looked fine. And again, you're a first time mum, you kind of don't really know. But then there was a certain point at which I like felt in my bones, I'm like, there's something not right. There's something not right. And I think trusting that you are the expert in your body, someone else can look, have the surgical knowledge and the experience and look and say, it looks fine. But it's similar to breastfeeding when someone looks and says, oh, it looks right. Your attachment looks right. You're the expert on your body. And if you feel pain, discomfort, whatever you want, you can ask for, I want more. Don't just feel like, oh, you're making a fuss. And I know that happens, and there's so many stories that we've all heard of people being told, oh, stop making a fuss, stop making a big deal, it's not that bad, take a Panadol, whatever it might be. But that trusting that sense that you know your body and if something doesn't feel right, to stand up for yourself.
Yes, I think that's a great point to make, that if you don't feel right, you just speak up, and who cares what anyone else thinks? Like, honestly. I remember the day after when I was in the hospital, I had these weird sensations, and I just remember thinking that must be normal, and I never said anything. And talking to my OB, the OB that delivered my second son years later, she's like, that doesn't sound normal. But she said, if you would have told any of the nurses there, though, what happened, they probably still would have brushed it aside, right? Because it's almost like anything and everything under the sun is normal after you've had a baby, because everything's kind of crazy down there. So again, I don't know what would have happened, but trust your gut. If something feels wrong, ask somebody, I think that's such a good point to encourage new mothers.
Even just, I suppose, if we think about the concept of pain and what we know about pain, whether you should be in this amount of pain or that amount of pain, like whose guess is that? If you are in excruciating pain, even if you just had a paper cut, that's relevant because it says that your body's in distress. And we don't want bodies in distress when we're birthing and just after we've given birth. So that in itself is, I will never kind of get the whole thing where people are like, oh, stop complaining about being in pain. I'm like, pain is a useful piece of information. Because even if you're not objectively supposed to be in pain, it's telling you that someone's stressed. And if they're stressed, that's something we can do something about, hopefully. Oh, well, I am so grateful, like beyond that you'll ever know, that you were willing to talk about that, because I know it wasn't easy. I feel grateful to have kind of an opportunity to do it. It's not easy to talk about, but at the same time, I know it could help someone, so it feels worth it. I think it kind of gets a little easier every time. I mean, different things come up, I imagine. And I guess this is the thing with trauma, like it's never going to be where you talk about it and you feel amazing and you feel wonderful. But it sort of gets to a point where you're like, okay, I can talk about it and not feel like I'm going to fall apart.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely at that place. I feel okay.
Yeah.
So that feels good. Yeah.
And I think that muscle memory for when you hear someone else say that and you see them and you kind of put yourself in the picture and go, okay, yeah, this could get better. This could get more manageable. This is not a life sentence.
Right. Yeah.
That is going to do wonders for someone. Well, hopefully multiple someones.
Sure. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I know it is. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much as well. It was great talking with you.